Now, the King's tour of Australia comes to an end today, and the first visit in 13 years by a reigning British monarch hasn't been without its challenges. He was confronted in Parliament House by Indigenous Senator Lidia Thorpe, who shouted, "You are not my king," and today was questioned once again by First Nation activists. Our royal correspondent Laura Bundock has the latest from Sydney.
I think the palace was certainly rattled by what happened in Canberra. Look, I spoke to a senior aide a little earlier today, very keen to downplay it, saying, look, it was just 30 seconds of disruption in a day in the capital city, which saw thousands and thousands of people turning out to see the King and the Queen. But I think they were cross that it happened at that moment. And the palace will say, look, the King is very keen to engage with Indigenous leaders. And of course, we did see that, just in his speech in Canberra yesterday, but his first engagement today was to an Indigenous centre where he met elders. He had the traditional welcome to country ceremony, a smoking ceremony, and had this private meeting where he could start up these sorts of conversations. So speaking to those elders afterwards, I think they pretty much agreed that what Senator Lidia Thorpe had done wasn't the approach they would have taken. They did agree with some of the messages she was trying to get across and appreciated the fact that the King was there to have conversations with them, because the horrors of Australia's past haven't gone away as far as they're concerned. Anyway, for the King and Queen, they carried on. Here in Sydney, it was a sparkling day, as you can see. They went to a community barbecue. They were given tongs. The King was on the barbie, sorting out some vegan sausages. And then here to the Opera House, this iconic landmark on the harbour. And it's hard to go wrong, really. There were thousands and thousands, 6,000 people, we were told, turned out to see them. And then to just behind me, where they saw a review of the Australian Navy. I mean, the day probably couldn't have gone better for them. It hasn't, though, been without its challenges, this trip, as we saw in Canberra yesterday. And bear in mind, the whole fact that the King has made it here, given his cancer diagnosis, is a big deal too. But because they're here for such a short amount of time with so few engagements, it really did matter. I mean, the palace will say it was actually quite a constitutional test coming here to Australia. It was a real chance to test the monarchy in a realm overseas. They didn't know how well the King would go down under, but when you looked at the thousands and thousands of people who'd come here to the harbour today, I think you could almost hear a sigh of relief from the palace that this was a crowd-pleasing moment, and they were very happy to see the people here.